Welcome to Mile High Mana. I'm Lee Wilson, joined with Grant Johnson. How are you, man?
Doing all right, boss. How you been?
I'm okay. You kind of sprung on me. I'm going to do the intro this time, so here I am doing the intro.
I figured we have to get confronted by your voice every now and again, you know?
Yeah, totally fair. I'm probably going to be doing a lot of the chatting too today, but I'm glad we got some time. It's Memorial Day. Everybody got the day off. You pinged me earlier, like, do you want to do a podcast? I was like, yeah, we could totally do that. I had a
Yeah,
pretty fun week.
definitely. I did too, and I think we also have probably a good hour of stuff worth of stuff to talk about. Man, I can't talk. We typically don't want to just make podcasts for the sake of making podcasts. We kind of want to make sure that we can have at least an hour's worth of content to cover. So yeah, if anyone's ever like, oh, where's the next podcast? It's like, well, we're not really feeling super convicted by anything at the given moment.
The last podcast we did with Casey, I thought was really excellent, and we got a lot of good feedback on it. And I had a couple people ask that I tag the description of the podcast with the format, so I'll do that. For those of you who are interested in a specific format, today we're going to talk about Legacy. There was a Duel for Duels tournament down in Colorado Springs on Saturday, and then yesterday I played an RCQ. So we'll talk about Modern, and I'm kind of getting prepped for the Spotlight series in Indianapolis. So it'll be Legacy and Modern today. Any thoughts, Grant, here before I kind of get started on, I guess we'll start with Legacy?
I mean, yeah, we can't forget that we're finally covering PreModern too today. First time I think we're really digging deep on that format.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I totally forgot about PreModern, but yeah, there's probably some basic forest talk to come from Grant on PreModern, so perfect.
No doubt.
I guess I'll get started. So I've been playing basically a different Legacy deck every week since the bans in March, and haven't been particularly thrilled with any of them, to be honest. I think the deck that I enjoyed the most was the deck list that I just net decked from Harane, which was the Ancient Tomb, Torpor Orb, Null Drifter, Phyrexian Dreadnought deck. The threats in that deck were a little bit sketchy, but the cards that I really liked were casting Stock Up off Ancient Tomb. I really had never played Brainstorm and Ancient Tomb and Force of Will in the same deck before. So that was pretty fun. And after that, I kind of messed around with the Delver decks and the Core Steel Cutter and the Blue-Black Tempo decks, and I just hadn't really been thrilled. So in preparation for the Duel for Duels, I decided, well, I think Entomb and Reanimate, surprise, surprise, is still the most powerful thing to do for that amount of mana. But I wanted to play Stock Up and I wanted to play Barragoyf. So I basically built myself a blue-black Reanimator shell. I cut Wasteland from the deck and actually ended up playing 5 Soul Lands, 3 Ancient Tombs, and 2 City of Traders. And in the Ponder spot, which, again, I think there's been a lot of discussion lately about Ponder and Legacy, I decided to cut all of them. And I played a card that I found on Scryfall called Lunar Hatchling, which I'll tell the audience here kind of what that is, because I'd never heard of it either. Lunar Hatchling costs 4 colorless, blue and green for a 6/6 flying trample, but it has 2 colorless to basic land cycle. So in my deck, it could get both the basic island and the basic swamp. And you can also escape it for 4 blue green, exile 5 cards from your graveyard, and exile a land in play, which is kind of an interesting cost I've never seen before for a 6/6 trampler. But basically what I wanted to do is have sufficient blue cards in my deck, first off, because all the other land cyclers that I found were not blue, and the Reanimator deck specifically struggles with having sufficient blue count. And I also just really dislike Ponder in the deck. Like, the deck really wants to cast Tamiyo, Thoughtseize, or Entomb on the first turn, and it really kind of wants to play a Soul Land on the second turn to either, cast Animate Dead through Daze or cast Stock Up or Barragoyf. So there really wasn't time to cast Ponder in the deck, and I found that if you loaded up on reanimation spells without having a cycler in your deck, like Troll of Khazad-dûm used to be, that you could simply draw hands with, 2 or 3 reanimate spells and then never find Entomb, and your deck kind of failed to function. So anyway, kind of on a lark, I threw Lunar Hatchling in my deck and went to the tournament just hoping to, draw a bunch of Entomb, Reanimate, Force of Will hands. The first round I played against Luis on Blue Green Omni Show. Kind of an interesting game one that I think I kind of won because his deck failed to function, but he started the turn off with Ancient Tomb Lotus Petal Stock Up on turn 1 and proceeded to cast Stock Up on turn 2 and turn 3 of that match. I thought I was like totally dead, but I had kind of drawn into pretty decent disruption, both Thoughtseize and multiple Force of Will. So we kind of had this back and forth game. And ultimately, I won the game by hard casting Lunar Hatchling off of 4 lands: an Ancient Tomb, a City of Traders, an Underground Sea, and a Tropical Island that I had in my deck. And won that game beating down with the 6/6 Flying Trample. So scoreboard 1 point for Lunar Hatchling in the very first round of the event. The second game was not particularly interesting either. I had a perfect 7, disruption, turn 1 Thoughtseize into Entomb Reanimate with Days backup. So that was a quick 2-0 and a nice way to start the tournament. You got any thoughts on the Omni Show deck, Grant? I know Max had played it some, and it looks like it's kind of like faded from the metagame, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on either of the show and tell variants currently?
I think that the Omni Show deck is kind of fading fast. And like Max has hopped off this deck too. And I think a lot of the reasons why it's fading quickly is because it's like its most powerful card in both of the show and tell variants is still going to be Stock Up. I also think that it does kind of a slightly better Allurin impression. Shout out Allurin, obviously, but we're looking at a combo that requires a show and tell plus an omniscience plus a cunning wish to win the game. Whereas like Allurin is pretty similar. It's just 1 more mana, but you need a creature and a Cavern Harpy, a creature that draws a card, right? So it's just a more leaner version of like an Allurin deck, and we know for a fact that like Allurin's not that good. So, I think that at the very beginning, it was getting a ton of equity from just being like the very first stock up deck to break into the meta. And then now that the Dimir tempo decks have been solved for, and Oops All Spells is it's pretty rough for Omnitel, I think. I think that's why that deck has slid a little bit. Like the 2 best decks in the format just kind of house it, and then even at its best, it's just doing like the same thing Allurin does for 1 less mana.
Yeah, I kind of feel that. I've always liked the sneak attack variants better just because you have a little bit more action and less air, and you get to sideboard into pretty powerful cards and like Pyroblast, Meltdown, Magus of the Moon type stuff. So I've always liked the sneak attack versions better. And that's kind of what happened in my first game against Luis is he just literally drew like nothing but air. Like all of his stock ups just hit like lands and cantrips, and he just never found show and tell in the top, let's call it 25 cards of his deck, and he lost, right? So anyway, I kind of have the same feeling that those decks are like kind of mediocre, but that's all right. It was kind of interesting to play against. I don't play against the deck a lot. Anyway, so round 2, I get paired into Josh, a good friend of the pod. He was on Cradle Control. He's been working on that deck quite a bit. And that deck can actually be pretty scary because Josh is playing, I believe, 2 or maybe even 3 copies of Keen-Eyed Curator in his deck to fight against the graveyard decks in the format. And I end up winning that game, actually both of those games, not on the reanimate plan at all, even though I left it in my deck. I just won those games by Barrogoyfing. So I believe it's game 1 against Josh. I was able to cast Barrogoyf on turn 2 and Barrogoyf on turn 3. And then ultimately, when I hit with one of them, I found a third Barrogoyf. And that was really just more than Josh could handle. Barrogoyf was a house all day, spoiler, against any fair deck in the format, basically. And it really does synergize well with the Reanimator plan for a couple of reasons. One, it offsets the life loss from Reanimate, Thoughtseize, and Ancient Tomb, which is significant in this deck, if you can imagine. Like, there was a whole bunch of games where I was at 8 life and I had done all 12 damage to myself by fetching, Thoughtseizing, and casting Reanimate, right? So, like, the lifelink on Barrogoyf was extremely good. And it's actually pretty difficult to remove. Like, unless you have exactly Revolted Fatal Push, there's, and there's not a lot of plow. in at least our paper metagame. It's pretty difficult to remove. So, you know, outside of the fact that it can always obviously mill over one of your fatties, which I think the obvious thing there, it's Baragorf is extremely good. And I think Josh basically just lost both of those games on the back of Baragorf being extremely good. He had one slight misplay where he chose to play Wide of the Reliquary instead of Keen-Eyed Curator in our final game, and ended up losing him the match there because I was able to both Thoughtseize and Entomb Reanimate. So that was enough to clear his endurance, and then be able to combo him, where if he would have left up mana for Keen-Eyed Curator, I think I was stuck there. So anyway, pretty good start. I like the Cradle deck. There's a couple good pilots locally that play the Cradle deck. I know you've played the Cradle deck. That deck is always kind of challenging to play against because they have so many interesting lines. I guess I'll prompt you here too, Grant. Like, you are off the Cradle deck and have been for a long time. Like, what about that deck don't you like kind of right now, since I know you were a big fan of it for a long time?
Well, the version that I played was just way cooler, to be honest. I just liked playing Agatha's Soul Cauldron and Secret of Skybreak. It's, by the way, it's way worse. I'll say that.
Yeah.
I like playing the cool stuff, but yeah, it's been probably since what, Eternal Weekend of 2023 was like the last time I registered like a Cradle control variant. And I was playing like 4 Grist, 3 Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Seeker of Skybreak, Quick Reflexes in the main. Now they have new tools like White of the Reliquary, Scythecat Cub. The lands package has just gotten better too with the addition of like Talon Gates and Madara. I just like, for me, I think where I struggle with wanting to ever play that deck is that you're just at such a mercy, like the first couple turns of the game. Like, obviously, you can have Leyline of the Void and Snuff Out and Thoughtseize out of the sideboard, but like game one, you're very often like at the mercy of the first turn and a half of like what your opponent can do, which is, you know, like if the Cradle Control deck gets to like turn 3 and gets to untap with a land rotator, that being like White or Elvish Reclaimer, it's probably the best deck that you could be playing after turn 3. But it's so dubious, like trying to get to that point in the game, at least right now in today's meta.
Yeah, fair enough. Josh's motto is like untap with Right of the Reliquary, then figure it out, and I think that's pretty apt. That card's extremely good, and if you get to that point, I think you're great. But I have the same issue that you do, like not playing a Force of Will deck and just praying that your instant speed interaction of either Snuff Out or Endurance is good enough, to me is like kind of sketchy. But you know, everybody has their own preference. So I win that match 2-1 against Josh. Round 3, I get paired into Ash on Blue-Black Tempo. Spoiler alert, Ash makes it to the finals of this event. So on a super stock list, I think it's the list that Nathan Lippitz won the Legacy Showcase Challenge with maybe 2 weeks ago. Just super stock, super solid Blue-Black Tempo. But I'll tell you, this is the matchup where my deck felt super ahead of all of my opponents. So I got very fortunate to win the die roll in this match and started with turn 1 Tameo on the play. And the entire beginning of the game, let's call it the first 4 turns of the game, were kind of all about Tameo. I was able to flip Tameo on turn 2 with a Brainstorm after having made a clue. And then I was able to play stock up into Baragorf on the first kind of 4 turns of the game. And, you know, Ash did kind of what you'd expect, playing like Nethergoyf and Bowmasters and stuff. And like the whole game basically revolved around my Tameo for the first several turns, as it tends to do when you flip it on the second turn. And finally, I was just able to cast stock up twice. And by like the 6th turn of the game, I basically had a full grip of cards. So I untap on turn 6 and happened to draw Entomb, which I heard was quite a good card, and was able to basically cast Entomb Reanimate with a bunch of cards in hands to my opponent, who only had 2 or 3 cards in their hand. And I just basically ran away from the game. From that point, the game was basically over. They scooped it up. This is where, you know, not having a bunch of like Ponder and Daze and stuff that like can be dead, or Wastelands even can be dead cards in these tempo matchups, felt really, really good. And I just vaulted ahead on mana, able to resolve multiple stock ups and then fill my hand with interaction and be able to resolve Entomb Reanimate through anything that they could possibly have. So I won that match. And the second match was like kind of, or the second game rather, was kind of the same. I had a hand with multiple Baragorfs, and basically was able to resolve turn 2 Baraggoyf into turn 3 Baraggoyf, if my memory serves, and had a, Force of Will or Daze or something for their interaction. So that match did not even feel close, and I felt very ahead, just way higher power level than my blue black tempo opponent there. And that's honestly kind of how I felt about playing the deck, because I played both the regular blue black tempo deck, I think the exact same 75 that Ash played a couple weeks ago, and then I followed up by playing the Grixis version of that same deck, which just splashes Molten Collapse, Pyroblast, and Meltdown. And it kind of felt like the Delver decks of old, when they don't have any like really true great card advantage and the margins were super thin, where if you made one misstep with that deck, like pointing your removal spell at the wrong creature or countering or dazing the wrong, interactive, or interacting with the wrong spell of your opponents, basically, you just instantly lose the game because the margins were just super, super tight. And Ash and I discussed it after the event, and they felt the exact same way. They're like, look, you basically have to play perfectly and walk the razor's edge. And if you do that, you can basically win any matchup. But I don't know. I struggled with that deck because, it's pretty hard to play 6 or 7 rounds of Magic and not make any mistakes. And I felt the Reanimator deck gave me a lot better chance to just simply go way over the top of my opponent. And even if I had a misplay or misevaluated a game or a situation, like, my deck was so inherently powerful that I just went over the top of my opponent. So I won that match 2-0. Round 4, I get paired into Max. Max has been playing the Nadu Breakfast deck and has really learned to play it really quite well. I think he's using the sideboard and all the information from Yul Larson, who is probably the best guy to copy playing that deck, right? The last Eternal Weekend champion. He's just been on that deck forever. And Max basically just wiped the floor with me 2 games. I lost both games. They didn't feel particularly close. I think I struggle really to play against that deck. They have so many angles that they attack you on. And the game seemed to play out for me, not in a combo way so much, but we basically trade resources back and forth. I was forced to kill or force of will his Voice of Victory, which is a card that's been popping up in that deck, because if I don't, I basically can't interact at all on his turn. So basically ran me out of resources and then dropped Cavern of Souls, Naming Wizard, Resolve Nadu, and the game is over. So I don't know if you've had any success versus that deck, Grant, but like, I've really struggled to beat Breakfast, and I think I'm both sideboarding wrong and going about it wrong, but it just seems just like a nightmare to play against. I don't know what you think.
The only decks that like I've actually felt relatively like confident in beating the Breakfast deck with was when I was playing the Is It Delver list with 2 Magus of the Moon and 4 Pyroblast. So in Chicago, I think I played the Nadu Breakfast or some variant of Nadu 3 times, and I beat it twice, but I lost my win in to the Breakfast version. And then when I was on Infect, I actually got James a few times with that deck. So I think that being able to go just as fast while also protecting your combo in a way that they really like can't, and like Swords to Plowshares isn't going to get it done against Infect. It's you need more than that, and they don't really have more than that. Otherwise, like all the fair decks that I've played pretty much just get smashed by that deck. It's really frustrating. The Teamer Delver decks that I played got smashed by it. The Grixis Delver decks I played got smashed by it. It was just really that Is It Delver deck that I thought didn't have like quite as bad of a matchup, and some of the interaction can actually line up really well.
I could also imagine that the particular deck that I built for this tournament is just inherently really bad against that matchup. Max and I went to dinner with Eddie after the event, and he's like, the 2 best cards against me are Wasteland and Orcish Bowmasters, and I didn't have any copies of either of those cards in my deck. So, maybe I just built a deck that's inherently super weak to the Breakfast deck, and I guess I'm willing to say that that's possible. So I took my first loss of the tournament at 3-1, but fortunately for me, all of the opponents that I played had won all of their other matches. So Josh, and Luis and Ash had all won all their other matches. So I had by far the best breakers in the room, and I'm able to draw in round 5 and still be at the top of the bracket. So I draw in at 3-1-1, and I end up 3rd seat in the top 8. In the quarterfinals, I get paired against my nemesis, Eddie, on Red Painter. Eddie is just a wizard. honestly, at playing that red painter deck. And I was pretty nervous going into the match. I don't think my record overall is particularly good against Eddie. And I don't remember all the games in detail, but I do recall that in all three games, Eddie cast turn one Agatha Soul Cauldron. So that makes the reanimation plan really difficult. But once again, Baragorf kind of comes to the rescue. So I'm able to cast multiple Baragorfs in both of the games that I win. We actually had a really interesting point. I believe it was in the third game where Eddie had both an Agatha Soul Cauldron on the battlefield, one in his graveyard, and a goblin welder to move him in and out. So he actually had two Soul Cauldron activations if he wanted to in a turn cycle. And I finally end up getting multiple Baragorfs on the table and kind of force Eddie into a position where he had to get Soul Guide Lantern to even just protect against my Baragorfs off of his Saga trigger. And he ends up exiling my graveyard in combat to try to make the Goyfs basically shrunk down all the way to a 0/1 because he's able to like activate the lantern and then eat it with his own cauldron to like shrink my Goyfs. But luckily, I had drawn Lunar Hatchling for the turn and was able to instant speed basic land cycle to grow my Goyfs to 1/2s and then let them both trigger and then filled my graveyard again with another sorcery and an instant. And the Goyfs kind of ran away from the game from there. So I was able to reanimate my Lunar Hatchling post combat and then kind of had an untenable board position, end up pulling that quarterfinals matchup against Eddie. So felt pretty good beating Soul Cauldron on turn 1 3 games in a row. I lost one game to the game 2 that I had lost. He basically put Painter into play and top deck Grindstone, which again, I think that's one of the reasons that deck is good. He was kind of talking to me about some of the other decks, and I was like, look, I think back to our discussion about Cradle. I find Cradle in its current iteration to be inherently like too fair. It doesn't have like an I win button basically that the Painter deck does, and that game 2 really showed it where we were able to exchange resources. Eddie was able to put Painter into play, have Pyroblast for any permanent that he wanted to interact with, and then top deck the Grindstone to win. And I think if you're going to play a non-blue deck, you kind of need a 1/2 like I win button. That's just where I stand on it. You got any thoughts on Painter, Grant? The blue or the red version currently?
I think Painter's like it's a viable deck. I wouldn't necessarily call it like tier one, but it's probably in that tier 1.5 category. And I'm not convinced one's necessarily better than the other, especially when you're like talking about someone like Eddie, who's a great use case for just like putting in the time, energy, effort, and repetitions with one version of the deck. Like I would imagine the past 3 or 4 years that Eddie's been playing Painter, he's probably only changed about 10, 15 cards in his deck, and he's been playing very much the same cards over and over and over again, and like he's definitely super lethal with that, and like you know it, I wouldn't want to drop my tier 1.5 deck that I've put in 4 years worth of work on for a tier 1 deck. I think that really the only use case for someone like Eddie to ever make a transition to a new deck would be like if Painter was like tier 3, borderline unplayable, and he was going to go to Eternal Weekend or something, right? And you're going to want to play something a little bit better. But that's just not the case. So the Painter players are allowed to be as resilient as they want to be in metas like this. So I think that's kind of my feedback as far as like Painter goes. I am curious, like it sounds like Lunar Hatchling did more for you than just being like a basic land cycler. How often were you able to either escape it, reanimate it, get it into play in one way or another?
Let's see. I hard casted it round 1. I never escaped it. I reanimated it, I believe, 3 times over the course of the event. One time it got Brazen Borrower bounced. One time it got Pyroblasted by Eddie. And the other time it won the game. So yeah, and then I pitched it to Force of Will at least twice. So it was really quite good. It can be clunky, like 2 mana land cycling is a whole different ball game than one mana land cycling, but the card was quite good and everyone loved it, if that counts for anything.
It definitely wins the fan favorite points for sure. I'm also curious too, like it seems like it's a direct nombo with City of Traders. So, why play a 3-2 split? Would it be better to play 4 tomb, 1 city and have Barrogoyf make up for your life loss and like Archon and Atraxa? Because, basic land cycling off of a City of Traders just like, in my mind, sounds kind of atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, City of Traders was actively good for me all day because if you get two activations out of it, meaning cast a stock up and then cast a Barragoyf, or cycle it and then cast a Barragoyf, or cycle the Lunar Hatchling and cast stock, like all of that was fine. And it generating 4 mana, even if I had to sack it, was totally fine. The reason I didn't play Ancient Tomb was really two reasons. One, I was worried about the life loss from the deck. Just like a 4 reanimate, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Ancient Tomb deck just seemed really dicey and sketchy to me, that I'd be stuck with these cards in my hand that I couldn't cast. So that was first. The second thing was I have never really played stock up brainstorm combo decks like this before. So I just literally took JPA's Sneak and Show deck as my template for how to build the mana base and how to build the deck and how to do everything. And he plays a 3-2 split. So, that was good enough for me. That guy's played that deck for like 10 years and that's where he ended up. And so I just did the same. But I didn't really have that issue, Grant, because like if you're cycling the Lunar Hatchling, that means you're really not in the market to like hard cast it. And by that time, you typically have at least 2 or 3 lands in play, and you just got a fourth one. So you kind of have enough lands to cast everything in your deck at that point, right? So actually, the sacking of the City Traders like wasn't a problem for me because I'd already got my value out of it. I play my fourth land, let's call it, sacrifice the City of Traders. I can basically still cast everything in my deck. So it was pretty good.
Okay. I mean, I can get behind that. I think if I had to play your list, I'd probably start with 4 tomb, 1 city. That's just where my head goes. But, if it ain't broke, definitely don't fix it. So we went through the deck discussion. You just mentioned that you whooped up on Eddie. What did semifinals look like?
I knew my opponent in the semifinals was on the Epic Storm. I watched him play his quarterfinal match. I think that's just a really good matchup for me. Like it's a combo mirror basically where I have Force of Will and he doesn't. I also have cards like Null Rod and some other stuff in my sideboard. So honestly, the games weren't particularly eventful. I was on the play. I had a better seating. I draw a hand with Force of Will and Tomb Reanimate like a professional Magic player in the first game, and that wasn't particularly close. I will say, for those of you that are going to play the Reanimator deck, I think it's significantly better to get Archon over Atraxa in this type of matchup, and I don't think that's intuitive. Atraxa, the very best thing it's going to do is get you one counterspell. Like you can get exactly one Force of Will, and maybe a blue card to pair with it. And I really think against the Epic Storm, in my experience, you just need to kill them. And they don't take a lot of damage, outside of fetch lands potentially. So oftentimes, like in this particular game, the Atraxa was going to be a 3-turn clock, and the Archon is going to be a 2-turn clock. And I'd rather just take a resource away from them, make them discard a card, give me another card, even if it's at random, and then hope to end the turn, or I'm sorry, end the game in 2 turns. And that's how it played out. I discussed it with my opponent after that too. He says, yeah, a lot of his Reanimator opponents get Atraxa in that spot, and he also agreed that it was kind of wrong. I know you've played a bunch of Epic Storm, Grant. Do you have any opinion on the Archon versus Atraxa, kind of if you have your choice with Entomb?
No, I think that the Archon line seems pretty sound. My only fear with the Archon line is like maybe they get to cycle a Veil of Summer and then kill you on the crackback, but that will happen probably less times than Archon killing them in 2 turns, if that makes sense. So I think that's probably pretty sound logic. And I think it's pretty close too. Like I'm not gonna go up in arms if someone grabs an Atraxa and picks up their Force of Will and like Maybe it's good, maybe it's not, but I think that it's pretty sound logic.
I mean, that deck is also just like really good at beating Force of Will. It's kind of designed to do that with a million Veil of Summers and stuff. I didn't even think that getting Force of Will was like that particularly good. Anyway, it worked out. Both games I had Force of Wills and a line to quick reanimate. So I had cut Barogoyfs and Tamios basically because those cards were just like way too slow, and brought in, whatever slew of interaction, negations, consigns. I had Disruptor, Flute, I had Null Rod. I felt like really good in that matchup, and neither game was like particularly close. I just like had everything that I needed. I was able to force a gamble so he couldn't find the Echo of Eons, and then I was able to consign an LED and stuff. So anyway, everything lined up, and it was pretty quick 2-0 in the semifinals against what I assume to be is a quite favorable matchup for the Blue Black Reanimator deck. And then I'm paired into Ash, who I had played in round 3 on Blue Black Tempo. And, we kind of had the discussion up for prizes. I guess I'll say there was an Underground Sea, highly played for first place, and kind of an MP Volcanic Island. And Ash already had 4 Underground Seas and was interested in the Volcanic. So we just shook hands, and I took home the HP Underground Sea with Lunar Hatchling, 0 Wastelands, 0 Ponders, and 0 Bowmasters in my 75. So that was a pretty wild adventure, honestly.
Blink twice if you're okay, Lee.
I'm doing okay. I feel pretty good about it, honestly.
Those are cards that you've been playing for what, 2 years? I mean, Bowmasters for 2 years, but Wasteland, Ponder, and all that stuff for over a decade. So it's probably got to feel a little bit weird.
I tell you what, there's probably like some advantage that I had. Like there were several of my opponents, both Ash and maybe somebody else too, that fetched basics on turn 1 because like I'm typically the Wasteland player, and I think they were just expecting me to be on a bunch of Wastelands, and so they ended up having to fetch basics, and it kind of hindered their development in the game. So actually I think there was a pretty serious advantage I had by, surprising people with Ancient Tomb and not having Wasteland in my deck, even though a bunch of people played around Wasteland and Days, of which I only had 2 copies in my deck, again copying JPA's template. So I think that really, the unknown kind of brew factor there definitely played in my favor.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. So I guess they fucked up on the ban list is basically what we're saying. The troll was not the hit. It was definitely Entomb.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just trying to maintain the heritage or legacy, quote unquote, pieces of the puzzle. But like Entomb is just a messed up Magic card. I mean, in my estimation, if Vampiric Tutor isn't legal, I don't understand why Entomb should be legal. It's by far the most broken effect. It's by far the scariest thing that your opponent will ever do to you in turn 1 in Legacy. I think we talked about this ad nauseum when the ban list went on. I disagreed with the troll ban list. I still believe that Entomb Reanimate is the most powerful thing to do in the format. Andreas Eco Baronin has top 8'd, I believe, 3 challenges in the last 9 days casting Entomb Reanimate. I've been part of his Discord kind of community, and I would imagine that he believes that it's still the best deck in the format. And it's kind of embarrassing, honestly, that we've had 3 straight ban announcements trying to maintain this deck as a reasonable position in the format, and I believe they've failed to do that once again. I would much prefer that they ban Entomb and unban the troll and just let people, if they want to do fair reanimatory stuff, like fine. But Archon just beat the crap out of people all day, honestly. I got it more than Atraxa, and Archon just ends the game so fast. It's kind of covered up right now, but the fact that Oops All Spells is potentially even more of an egregious experience than Entomb is. So Entomb's not getting a lot of hate right now, but I certainly think it's still out of line. But I guess we'll see what goes on in June.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do anything about it in June. Well, while I disagree, I mean, I think that they absolutely should. I think that they're just going to solve the Oops All Spells problem, and then we're going to go through June, July, August, and parts of September with everyone just playing this like Reanimator deck, basically, in one way or another. because like you've basically introduced a third way to build it. This is like Reanimator Stompy in a weird way, like Barrogoyf Stompy featuring Entomb Reanimate. Then you also have like the tempo version with Days and Wasteland and all that stuff. And then you have like the pure Reanimator, like with Faithless Lootings and or Careful Studies with Dark Rituals and Lotus Petals. So I'm anticipating them solving the oops problem, not touching Reanimator once again. And then we're basically going to have the 3 months leading up to Eternal Weekend just being another Reanimator fall or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. It felt like by far the most powerful deck that I had played since the banning, and I mean, Stock Up and Barragoyf are just unbelievably powerful cards. It pulls you so far ahead in the fair matchups. Like those 8 cards compared to my opponent's, Ponders and Dazes and Wastelands just felt like a totally different league of power level in the fair matchups. And then you still have a really busted unfair plan with Entomb Reanimate and the combo decks, right? If you're talking about that wedge of the format, they don't care if you take a bunch of damage off your Ancient Tomb, right? So it's felt pretty free, although I will say, taking Wasteland out of your deck definitely makes you bad against the other Saga decks, of which Breakfast is definitely one of. So I would imagine that this version of the deck would kind of suffer against the Saga decks of the format. But right now, I think that's basically just Breakfast and Blue Painter and Red Painter. And in those matchups, like the Painter matchups for sure, the Barrowglyphs are really good. And, we'll see what I can do to address the Breakfast matchup kind of going forward. But I'm going to continue to play the deck. It's been really, really strong. I kind of inflamed a little bit of a discussion in the Eco Baronin Discord about cutting Ponder. And I'm not sure it's correct that this deck plays 0 Ponders. It maybe should play a couple, but I just really couldn't find room for them, and it was more of an experiment than anything. And I don't know. I'm really not convinced. I guess you and I can probably sit down and do some play testing and kind of figure out if there should be a couple in the deck just for consistency reasons. But for the time being, like Ponder's in a weird spot in the format. I know you have some thoughts on that card in specific.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I need to go back in time a little bit. After Chicago, Legacy Cup Chicago, I sort of had this feeling bubbling up that like Ponder was the worst card in my tempo deck. But at the time, I didn't really feel like, I was allowed to say that basically in like a weird way. And then as things developed, once we had the BNR, the last BNR, I'm just like noticing, Ponder being much better combo card, like in the Show and Tell decks, in the Reanimator decks, in the Cephalid Breakfast decks. Infect too. I mean, I've been playing a little bit of that too, but like those decks are great Ponder decks. But when we look at like the Dimir Tempo and the Delver decks, I don't like about a month ago. I think I even told you this, Lee, where I was like, I don't think Ponder's good anymore, and I found myself sideboarding it out in a ton of my matchups. From even when I was playing the Delver decks that are just like, we need sorceries for Delirium. Nope, get them out of there. I just don't have time to cast Ponder in this world. So it's kind of validating that, we did end up getting some content, last week from Andreas and Eternal Dirtles. They talked pretty, ad nauseum about how bad that card is. Whether you agree or disagree with some of their takes is like notwithstanding. It's mainly just the fact that this discussion is happening that I think is like kind of cool. I know that there's also a bunch of folks out there that are like, Ponder's a mainstay, it's busted, it used to be restricted in Vintage, and like those people can play Ponders in whatever decks that they want to. But like I personally have a hard time playing all 4 in my super fair deck that's looking to do like stick a threat, win the game, stick a threat, win the game, Daze, Wasteland, Force Will my opponent. I just don't think that you have the time unless you're looking for something really specific that ends the game.
Yeah, I've been a little bit kind of on your side of the aisle where it's felt kind of mediocre in the tempo decks. Obviously, it's a sorcery for Nethergoyf or Dragon Rage Channeler. It's an instant for Delver. It's a blue card for Force. It helps flip Tameo. Like it does a lot of small things to where I'm not as convinced as you are that it needs to go from the tempo decks, although I think it's lost its luster a little bit. I would still be playing at least 3 or 4 in my deck. But in the Ancient Tomb versions, so both in the Stifle Knot deck with Ancient Tomb and stock up, and the Reanimator deck that I built with Ancient Tomb and stock up, you really are way shorter on colored pips, and you're very constrained on what you can do based on how much blue or black mana you have in a specific turn, and they've been very bad for me there. And I was kind of happy to cut them. I would only really have been able to do that though if I hadn't found Lunar Hatchling. I would have had to play Ponder because without it, my blue count would have been something like 17 or 18 or whatever, and that would have been a real problem. As it stands, I believe my deck had 21 main deck blue cards, which is really barely just cutting it. But I felt kind of okay with that because I also played 4 Thoughtseize. And then, it could be higher, after board, whatever. So I don't know. I'm with you. I think Ponder is kind of medium and really depends on the deck. And I would just say that if you're thinking about building a deck in Legacy, that you need to at least consider the fact that it may not be a 4 Ponder deck. Don't even think about it sort of discussion. I think there is, if you look at Vintage, which is arguably, a totally different format than Legacy because the mana acceleration is so fast, there aren't any fair decks in Vintage, I don't think, that are playing, many, if any, Ponders. And I think we're kind of moving towards that place in Legacy as well, where there's just so many efficient, good cards to play that are much more impactful than Ponder is, that, it may, slowly, kind of fade its way out of the format. So I don't know, something to keep an eye on.
Well, I'll ask you this: does an Oops ban or like even a Reanimator ban, does that change the way Ponder's being used?
Yeah, probably does. The more turns that the format goes, I think the better the Ponder gets, because turn 1 Ponder is the worst Ponder you can play. Turn 4 or 5 Ponder is often quite good because you have your mana under you. You're basically not looking for lands at that point, hopefully. You're looking for action. It gives you a lot of selection. So if we get to the point where there's a bunch of matches in Legacy where, you get to play 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 turns, I think Ponder gets better and better. So I think the Oops and Reanimator does have a lot to do with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm good to move past pondering. You ready to talk about some pre-modern?
I mean, it's a format I know very little about, so I mean, I'll pass the floor to you. Yeah, tell me how this was your first major pre-modern event, right?
I mean, I wouldn't call it major. It was a Denver monthly, but they don't like it's really rare, I think, to live in a place that you have so many different options to play this game. So I'll start there. And I really don't, to be fair, I don't really know that much about this format either. I kind of just net decked a list years ago, and then I've made a couple adjustments and tweaks based on what I've seen at like Lobster Con and other finishes. But for those that don't know, pre-modern is Ice Age to Scourge. So that is it's the last printing. So Scourge is the last printing before the modern era begins and the modern card frame is introduced. So it's a locked format. So you get, again, cards from Ice Age to Scourge. Now, because it's a locked format, there are a lot of ways that folks approach the metagame, I guess. Like, there are decks that are like at the top. There's sort of your S tier decks. There's very rarely ever like bans, from what I understand, or like rotations or changes to the format. So you can really play the same thing forever, and as long as it's good, it'll be good forever. So naturally, I mean, I always lean towards playing the green stuff. So I already owned the Guys Cradles. Some like 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago is when I bought my Cradles. Basically, like right before the printing of Lord of the Rings. So yeah, about 2 years ago. And I played my Cradles in Legacy, had a blast with them, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm only like 4 survival of the fittest short of building like a tier 1 pre-modern deck. So I like went and bought some survivals of just varying costs. Or actually, sorry, I only bought 1 survival, and then I worked out a trade with my buddy Joel for his like childhood survivals that like him and his brother opened up out of packs of Exodus, which is a really cool story. Like I'm never gonna get rid of those survivals. So ended up getting those. Had all the things that I needed for basically the most expensive deck in pre-modern. And it's also the most fun deck because I can't really play like any version of elves in any format in Magic right now. So this is a really good outlet for me to play some of my favorite cards in Magic. But so Denver, they have an organized monthly. The Denver Mulldrifters PreModern organization, DMPM is basically what they call it. It's run by like Evan DeWitt, and Nick Orkella and Kurash and Hans. You know, they're all like really good contributors to this cause. All of them also were legacy gamers and still are to some extent, but I know that they're mostly focused on like pre-modern and dual commander today. But so I built this like pre-modern deck, 2 years ago, and basically was like, yeah, guys, I'm gonna come out. It's gonna be fun. Blah 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 blah. Didn't touch the deck for 2 years. Just I don't know really what compelled me to just build this deck and spend this money on survivals and other things, and then just not touch it. But I guess life just got in the way. I'm not sure, but so I finally got my chance to get around to playing yesterday, and we had like I don't know exactly how many folks we had, but the short of it is I ended up finishing top 4 with elves. I got exactly 4th place. And we didn't end up playing out. So we did a cut to top 4, but we didn't play out top 4, which like I think some people really like. Me personally, I would have loved to have played it out. I think that I would have just gotten paired into Karash and he would have destroyed me with his mono black like contamination plague deck. But still would have been fun to do that. So yeah, my Swiss rounds. Let's see. Actually, I guess before I hop into Swiss, Lee, do you have any sort of questions or anything about my coverage of pre-modern there?
No, if you've never looked at it, I think you can just look up PreModern on just a Google search, and the website that they have built is really good. It outlines like the major decks of the format and the ban list and stuff. So if you're interested in PreModern, I think that's probably the best resource. I kind of struggle with PreModern as a format in general, just because I kind of like the puzzle of deck building, and I feel that a format that doesn't kind of rotate and change has never like just like really gathered my attention to want to focus on. I think I have most of the cards. I have all the cards to build the Sly deck, which is the mono red kind of burn little creature deck, and I have I think all the cards to build the blue Stifle Knot deck, but I've just like never really caught and gotten into that. But maybe if you're into it and you guys are having a good time, I may come and join you.
Yeah, I mean it's also just a very like low stakes sort of relaxing environment. We played at Wonderland Brewery, which is a cool brewery up in Broomfield. So I got there like I guess 40-ish minutes before we got started. Like sat down, I had a drink, got my deck together, caught up with Kyle Blankenship, caught up with Kurash. Met a couple other folks from the Discord that I hadn't met in person yet. So it was just really good vibes all around. I had an awesome like grilled chicken sandwich for lunch too. So just really easy access to good vibes, I guess, when it comes to drinks and food. And yeah, so I sat down for round 1 against Kyle, who also was a previous Legacy player. He let me know that he was basically done with Legacy and was focused fully on pre-modern. But Kyle was on Terrageddon, which I think is actually probably one of my best matchups because I don't really care about Terravor and I don't really care about Armageddon. So it was sort of I guess a good progression into the format by getting a really good matchup in round 1. So it was basically I got a couple things got plowed, but then I was just like survival of the fittest, squee, looping the squee to get anything that I needed out of my deck. Grabbed Masticore, grabbed Kamal, Fist of Kroza, Deranged Hermit, and just started just like turning shit sideways until the games were over. Hilariously, like I probably missed throughout the whole day. I think I missed like 4 or 5 echo triggers. Because that's just not something I was used to. And like I have one Deranged Hermit that's actually in Japanese, and that's the one that I kept missing my echo triggers on. My English one's like I remembered, but the Japanese one, for whatever reason, just because I couldn't read it, like I forgot the echo trigger. I also forgot the echo trigger on Multani's Acolyte, which is just a bad Elvish Visionary. And then I forgot an echo trigger on Yavimaya Granger, which like fetches a land. So I was not very well prepared with the workflow of my deck. But it didn't really end up biting me too badly just because the deck sort of runs itself after a while, and you draw so many cards. And if you have a survival that goes unanswered, you just like feels like you just can't lose. So that was my round one against Kyle. My round two was against Levi, and Levi was playing Nick Wish, which was basically like a Cabal Therapy Veteran Explorer deck that instead of playing Survival of the Fittest, it played Living Wish for like a toolboxy sideboard, which I thought was really cool. And Levi was actually my only loss on the day. We played three super close, really fun games. Game one, I played right into a Pernicious Deed, and he blew the whole board up. But we were both like at parity, and I just started top decking like Masticores and Deranged Hermits and stuff, and just ended up like taking over. Super lucky top decks. Then game two, he had beat me up with I can't even remember, like the Plague Spitter, I think is what it's called. It in his upkeep, it deals 1 damage to each creature, and then he gains a life and I lose a life. So it just like it's a recurring board wipe over and over and over again. And then he was also on 4 Pernicious Deeds. So yeah, we pushed it to a game 3. He answered a couple of my Deranged Hermits. He answered a Masticore. I actually also worked through the 1 Plague Spitter and then 2 Pernicious Deeds, and then I ended up like dumping a bunch of power into play with a Sylvan Messenger and died to the 3rd Pernicious Deed. So good games all around with Levi. It was fun to see that deck. It was also a deck that I could see myself playing. And I actually remember, so game 2, I actually lost to Haunting Echoes. Do you know what Haunting Echoes does, Lee?
Not anymore. Remind me.
It's a 3 black sorcery, and it says exile target opponent's graveyard. Then exile each copy of each card exiled with Haunting Echoes. So he cast it and exiled a Llanowar Elves, Aquarian Ranger, Survival of the Fittest, Deranged Hermit, and Multani's Acolyte. Then he got to go into my deck and remove all the copies of all 5 of those cards.
Wow, what a beating.
Yeah, it was pretty absurd. I like had to read the card like 100 times. I'm like, wait, what? It was pretty sweet though. Like, I just saw a lot of cool cards. I was reading cards basically the entire day, but super cool way to kill the Elves deck. So that was my round 2. So I'm 1-1 at this point. Round 3, I play against Wei on Dimir. I'm gonna just call it Dread Atog, because it was playing the Dimir Atog. I don't even know. Do you know what it's called?
Yeah, Psychotog.
Psychotog, yeah. So Psychotogs plus Dreadnoughts. I died like on turn 3 in game 1 because it was just like real quick stifle Dreadnought, kill you. In game 2, I had double Naturalize effect, and it put Wei back a little bit too far to return to center and put himself in a winning position. So I got game 2. And then in game 3, I actually was able to just well-wisher my way into victory. So he actually had 2 Psychotogs and a Dreadnought at one point, and he was attacking every turn with them. The 2, at least Psychotogs, and then the last turn was the Dreadnought turn. But he kept turning shit sideways, and I was just gaining like 6 to 8 life a turn with my Well-Wisher and just taking in all the damage. Just didn't matter, just bring it on. And then eventually he was just kind of like, look, math is for blockers, and turned everything sideways. And then I did the math on how many cards he had in hand plus graveyard, and he was going to do like 28 damage, but I could go up to 34, and he was at 4 life, so I was able to kill him on the crackback with a bunch of weenies. So that was how game 3 ended. Super cool deck, though. I like the deck building of being able to have access to like Duress and Engineered Plague. He was able to Engineered Plague me, I believe, in game 2. So, game 2, and I won through it, which was cool.
Let's do a quick history lesson. Psychotog, uncommon creature printed in Odyssey. A colorless, a blue, and a black for a 1/2 ATOG. It has the ability, discard a card from your hand. Psychotog gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Remove 2 cards from your graveyard from the game. Psychotog gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And this is obviously the card that Psychic Frog was templated. Obviously, Psychic Frog is just a totally different power level. But I think what's important to understand is that this was the best creature in Magic for quite a while after it was printed. And you would never imagine that a 3-mana 1/2 that you could literally pump temporarily and had no evasion or any card advantage at all would be the best, but it absolutely was the best card in Magic for a long time. A little bit before my time as a player competitively, but this is talked about a whole bunch by players of this era as by far the best creature for a pretty good run in Magic. So anyway, pretty cool to see Psychotog out, beaten down in pre-modern.
Yeah, and like apparently Psychotog is a pretty decent like tier one deck. I'm not sure if it also plays Dreadnought, but I was just learning a whole ton over the weekend, which was great. So, and then my last round opponent was Mike, and this was basically the quote unquote winning in to top four. And Mike was playing a combo deck with Greater Good, Dreadnought, and I think it's called Pandemonium. It's like a big red spell or big red enchantment. So it was a combo deck with Dreadnought and Greater Good, and my deck just naturally comes correct with like 10 artifact and enchantment removal cards after sideboarding. So it was pretty against his favor, I would say, and I was able to get it in two. So overall, I mean, I had a great time. It was cool catching up with everyone. I think I was the only elves player in the room. I think I didn't see anyone else on it, but the deck was super clean. It ran like a beast, and I probably drew more cards than all my opponents in like every match. The deck draws an insane amount of cards for a green deck, and the Squee plus Anger package just allows you to turn over quick wins super quickly. So the way it works is you have Squee, Anger, and a basic mountain in your deck to pair with your Survival of the Fittest. So what Squee does is if it's in your graveyard, you pick it up every upkeep, which gives you basically a free creature out of your deck every single turn because you just discard Squee to the Survival every single turn. So you can go get any piece that you're missing. And then Anger, if Anger's in your graveyard and you have a basic mountain in play, all your creatures get haste. So all the activated abilities that I have, I can activate the turn that I play the creature. And then I can also just like turn all my creatures sideways, like Deranged Hermit and Kamal and things like that to like end the game super fast. So I was like very, very impressed with how good the deck was. And it like, I wouldn't be shocked if someone was like, it's one of the best decks in pre-modern, like it wouldn't blow my mind. Obviously, I think Replenish and Dreadnought are probably a step ahead of that deck, just because they also have good matchups against the Elves deck. But I don't see myself ever buying another pre-modern deck. I think I'm just gonna commit myself to Elves in that format specifically, because that's like the only way I feel like I'm gonna get my fix with playing some Llanowar Elves and other dorky little creatures.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, from everything that you described, it makes me want to put Cursed Totem in my sideboard. But
I actually beat a Curse Totem too yesterday. That was cool also.
like, were you able to kill it or what?
It was Curse Totem, and I was like, okay, dope. Just turn creatures sideways for like 3 turns. End the game.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense. Well, cool. I'm glad you had a good time, man. I mean, I'm sure it's fun. Honestly, it sounds like the gathering part of the pre-modern is probably the number one thing on the list, which I can certainly get behind. I did want to make one comment about you mentioned a bunch of foreign cards that you had in your deck that you didn't read and you played improperly. Against the Epic Storm opponent that I had in the semifinals of my Legacy event, literally not a card in their deck was in English, like not one. And that's just a real pet peeve of mine. Like, the game is complicated enough. You're trying to have an interactive match with your opponent, and like, I think to bring cards that your opponent can't understand, where you need to like go get Oracle text all the time for all your opponent's cards, is like, in my opinion, pretty bad tournament etiquette. And I know Jerry Thompson's had some discussions about this too, where he basically, used to love Japanese foil fancy cards, kind of like Roland Chang does, but has moved all his cards basically now to just be English so that he can maintain his, tournament etiquette basically, and that he's fair to his opponents for the deck that he's playing. And I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, I am pretty against bringing foreign cards into competitive events, and I think it really kind of does the whole scene a disservice. So anyway, small rant on my side.
So I can agree on some axis there, but I also disagree in another one where I think Legacy specifically, you should be able to swag out and ball out on whatever looks the coolest for your deck, because that's just kind of the nature of the format. I think I agree with like completely different language cards in like standard, pioneer, and modern. And when I say like different language cards, I'm talking about different language in like the place that you live, like, you know, and also if you're a native speaker of that language too, and like you come over and you're playing in an event in America, like that shouldn't be a knock on them either. But I think legacy, when we're talking about just a solo English speaker to solo English speaker, I think people should be allowed to have a little agency in making their deck look exactly how they want, especially when they're spending the amount of money that they are on some of these cards.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't have to like it. So,
Yeah, I don't have many foreign cards. I think I have like a few FBBs and then like that one deranged tournament. I think that's the only foreign card in my pre-modern deck, but it definitely got me a few times just for getting that echo cost. So we're at the top of the hour here. So Lee, I'm gonna pass it over to you for what's next on your agenda.
yeah, so I kind of decided last minute to go to the Spotlight Series in Indianapolis. I booked a flight and a hotel here about 4 or 5 days ago. I kind of just had the itch to play a big modern tournament. I'm going to the regional championship in Houston in October. I don't really have that many modern reps, and I really enjoyed my time at the Spotlight Series in Atlanta playing standard. So anyway, I'm kind of excited. I'm pretty locked in on playing the prowess deck. I've really enjoyed casting Chorus Steel Cutter in modern, and that prowess deck is just nasty. Mutagenic growth, violent urge, lava dart. You can kill people on turn 2, turn 3. Like, it's a pretty fast deck that can also go long. Like, obviously it plays Chorus Steel Cutter. It also plays Expressive Iteration. So there's a bunch of different kind of variants out there. I don't think anybody's really like locked in on a perfect 75. There's some people that are just playing a straight blue-red deck. Some people are splashing black for Thoughtseize. Some people are splashing white for like Wear Tear and Prismatic Ending. Some people are splashing green, I've even seen. So that deck is kind of in its early stages, but I've just really enjoyed playing it. So I've basically locked in on it. I have all the cards out here in front of me on my desk. And right now I'm leaning towards playing the white splash. Really the ways that you lose in that with that deck are that people play hate permanents post board. So stuff like Deafening Silence, High Noon, Chalice of the Void, Trinisphere, kind of all those types of cards. And I think Wear Tear is the card that I just really want access to. And actually being able to bring Prismatic Ending in for like the Boros matchups in the mirror, where it can kind of double as both hate removal and just basic 1-for-1 removal for, your Guide of Souls or your Monastery Swifters of the format is, I think, where I'm going to be. So I'm pretty excited. I looked at the agenda. I basically am going to play modern for 3 straight days. On Friday, they have a bunch of Reese queues. So hopefully maybe I can spike one of those and get my second qualification for the RC. The main event is on Saturday. There's 9 rounds on Saturday. You have to go 6-3 or better to make day 2. And then either way, either I'm going to be playing the main event on Sunday, or there's what they call super Reese queues, which I've never heard of before. But basically, it's a 6-round event, but 5-in-1 qualifies you for the regional championship. So I'm just going to have a bunch of shots at getting my second qualification and getting a bunch of reps in with the prowess deck. So I'm pretty excited. And, obviously top 8 goes to the Pro Tour, right? So everybody's going to be there jamming and playing hard. So I'm super looking forward to it.
Hell yeah, love that. And we'll definitely have to do a follow up pod for your experience in Indy. I will not be in Indy, but I will be playing in a local hybrid event. So it's a RCQ/MMS event. So I'm already qualified for the Mountain Magic Series Invitational. I mean, knock on wood, technically. I'm not locked, but I have enough points where I think it's virtually impossible. And then, I'll also be playing in an RCQ sort of setting as well. So it'll be a nice double dipping, I think.
Have you locked in on a deck? I know I saw a bunch of stuff. I've seen Belcher, I've seen Tameo, I've seen all sorts of stuff. Like, have you landed yet, or is it still TBD?
Nah, man, I'm just rocking vibes for this week. We'll see how I feel. Maybe a day or two before. I have 2 decks in mind that are sleeved and ready to go, and I could pick up either one of them. So
Nice.
I'll just see what vibes look like.
Yeah, I like that. The MMS events are always fun, so I'm sure that'll be fun to play in.
So Cool. Well, that's all I got here. Lee, anything else?
Nope. That's awesome. Thank you everybody for listening. We appreciate the feedback. I got a bunch of really positive comments when I went to the RCQs and the tournaments. It looks like more and more people are listening. And if you guys have any suggestions for us, we'd love to hear them. If there's any players that are listening that, have a topic in mind and they would like to come on the podcast and discuss it, feel free to reach out to Grant or I. We're always looking for guests. I think 2 of our best podcasts we've ever done had guests. It doesn't necessarily have to be a tournament finish. It can be really anything. So, if you're interested in coming on and talking about a topic of your choice, like, hit us up. Otherwise, we'll catch you guys next week after SCG Indy.
Well said. Take it easy, everyone.
Cheers.